Hey everybody, in this video we're going to talk about one of our special cameras called the Blackmagic Micro Cinema Camera. Alright, so how did we end up with this camera? Well, we had rented a camera a little while back, the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera, and it was the first Blackmagic camera I'd ever used. And one of the things I was blown away with right away was the picture quality. There was something about the picture quality of Blackmagic that just, you don't know what it is. You don't know if it's the color science or the crispness, the no artifacts or whatever it is. There's something about it that makes you go, wow, that looks really good, especially for affordable cameras. I mean, I'm sure you get these with Aries, I'm sure you get these with Reds, but those are, you know, $10,000 plus. Aries get into $100,000 cameras. You know, Blackmagic cameras are $1,000, $2,000 in that neighborhood, which is really great. So I was really blown away by that. And ever since I rented that Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera, I always thought it'd be great if we had a Blackmagic camera in our arsenal. So we turned to the Blackmagic Micro Cinema Camera for a couple of reasons. One, it had the 60 frames per second, which was great. Two, it was one of the most affordable Blackmagic cameras you could get. And three, we wanted to pair it with the Blackmagic Video Assist, which we could also use in the future. And four, if we ever upgrade to a bigger camera, the Micro Cinema Camera could act as a good action camera or secondary camera. All right, so where do we use this camera? We actually use this camera as our main camera, but on bigger productions where we have more time and more control over the environment that we're shooting in. So any kind of shots where we're doing interviews or we're doing scripted stuff where we have time to set up the shot, set up lighting, do all that, we use this camera for. Because the reality is this camera is not great in low light, so we have to add a lot of light to get this picture good. And it doesn't have great physical control, so they're very finicky, so you can't really just quickly switch settings. So we use this in more controlled environments. And in fact, this shot that you're looking at right now, we're using the Blackmagic Micro Cinema Camera for it. So our setup for this camera, we pair this with a Blackmagic Video Assist. So this is a 5-inch monitor because this camera itself has no way to monitor. You have no screen, it doesn't come with a screen. So we bought a Blackmagic Video Assist. We run an HDMI cord from the Micro Cinema Camera into the Video Assist. And for the lenses, we actually usually have a speed booster on this. So we use the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera speed booster adapted to Nikon F mount. Now there are some reports out there that the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera's speed booster is a very tight fit or doesn't fit at all in the Micro Cinema Camera. I can confirm that for us. It was very tight. You felt like you were grinding it. And in fact, after we put it on, we have not taken it off since. So it is a very, very tight fit, at least on our camera. With that, we use our Nikon lenses, and because it's a speed booster, it does reduce the crop factor, and we get the flexibility of using the lenses that we use on our regular cameras. Another thing we have around this is a small rig cage. It's about a $100 cage, which has a bunch of 1/4-20 holes in it and some bigger holes in it. It has 2 cold shoe mounts, and overall, it feels like it protects the camera a lot better. All right, so what do we like about this camera? Well, the first thing I like about this camera is you have a cinema camera here, which produces cinema quality images, but the form factor is still very, very small. In fact, this is called the Micro Cinema Camera for a reason. And the really nice thing about that is we could actually use all our existing gear. It's a light camera, so we can use our existing tripods. We can use, you know, cheap Canon batteries, you know, all of our accessories that we would use on that. When you start to look at if we were gonna get a Blackmagic Ursa or again, a Red camera, you might need a heavier duty tripod. You might need to get new fluid heads for your sliders and all this stuff like that. So because of its form factor, upgrading from a DSLR was actually very easy because we could use a lot of our existing gear. So another thing is because this is a cinema camera, you do get some video aids like focus peaking, which is really nice that we didn't have on our previous camera. We do have histogram, you know, we do have those kind of things, which is really, really nice. Another great plus about this camera over the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera, the original one, is this one actually does do 60 frames a second, so you can do some slow-mo, which is really great. But ultimately, the best thing about this camera and the main reason that we use this camera is the picture quality. In fact, we're gonna get into the things we don't like about this camera, but we put up with them because the picture quality is so sweet for this camera. Yes, it is 1080p, but the color science and the codec make the pictures look so good. First of all, again, there's this undescribable quality with Blackmagic footage where you're just like, man, this looks really sweet. But then there are more concrete things, like it's got a high bit rate, so you get low artifacts, you get really nice clean picture, and you get a lot of color information. This thing is really great to grade in DaVinci Resolve. You get a lot of dynamic range. You get 13 stops of dynamic range. So the picture quality is just awesome and is the #1 reason why you would use a camera like this. And something that has to do with picture quality that's really great is the codec they use. They use Apple ProRes, which is really nice. So it's really friendly with editors, carries a lot of information, has a lot of good bit rates. So you can do ProRes HQ, ProRes 422, ProRes LT. And to tell you the truth, even the lower grades of ProRes, like ProRes HQ and Proxy, still are very, very good, especially compared to DSLR codecs. They're actually very good, and me and Tim have a hard time telling the difference sometimes between these different codecs. So the codecs are really great. And of course, even though we don't use it a lot, this camera can record raw video, which is really crazy when you consider the price and the form factor of this camera. All right, what do we not like about this camera? The number one thing has to be the controls. The controls are, I don't want to say terrible, but pretty bad on this camera. You have to dive deep into menus and use these very small buttons, and all the buttons are on the front of the camera so you can't even see what you're pressing, and it just delays the whole shooting process for sure. In fact, it even pushes you to do things that you may not want to do. For example, you might want to adjust the shutter speed because you want to like deal with exposure issues, right? But instead of going into the menu and changing the shutter speed, it's easier to change the iris on your physical lens. So you'll do that instead of adjusting the shutter speed. So it pushes you to do things that you weren't even wanting to do. So that's how bad the controls are. So definitely, I mean, yes, there are physical buttons on the front, but they're definitely an issue when it comes to diving into menus and navigating that menu system with those buttons. Definitely not a good thing, and that's why we only use this camera when we have a lot of time to set up the shot. The second really bad thing about this camera is, yes, while you can plug in, a power adapter in it to power it, you have to do that by default with this big dangle of cables. It comes with this big kind of spider web of cables that you can plug in. Yes, you can solder your own and you can build your own, but out of the box, it's really annoying and you just basically don't use it. You just use batteries. Which brings me to the next point that we don't really like about this camera. The battery life is very unpredictable, and especially when you're dealing with third-party Canon batteries. So yes, I know there's a lot of arguments about buying first-party Canon batteries, but first-party Canon batteries are $100 a piece versus 10 to 20 bucks for third-party batteries. And if you're just dealing with one battery, you can't have another one that's charging. So we bought a lot of third-party batteries, and these third-party batteries are very, very unpredictable. Sometimes we'll put them on the camera, and because of the weather, because it's cold outside, we'll get like 10, 15 minutes of battery, but when you do a test at home, you get an hour-long battery. So it's very, very unpredictable, the battery life. And the battery gauges are not very good at telling you how much battery you have left. So battery life and battery management on this camera is really not that great. All right, another thing we should mention about this camera that's not so great is if you are coming from the DSLR world, like Nikon D7000, 7200, or some of the lower end Canons, this camera, you are starting to get into expensive media. You're starting to get into that area where expensive media matters because the bit rates are high. You're dealing with codecs where they're writing a lot of information to the SD card. You have to buy UHS 1 cards, and they can be a little bit more expensive than your regular SD cards. So you're starting to get into that expensive media. Now, even if you buy that expensive media, I will say that this camera on occasion has let us down. Now, the really nice thing is it does let you know when it lets you down, and I'm talking about drop frames. So there was one time we were recording with this camera out in the sun, and we think it might have been due to the heat, but as it was recording to the SD card started flashing. So at least it lets you know that, okay, we've got some drop frames here. But we've never had that problem with our other cameras, so that is something to be wary of, that you can experience drop frames even if you buy the approved media that Blackmagic has given to you. Now, mind you, that's only happened once or twice to us. It doesn't happen very often, but it definitely has happened. And yes, the form factor is great for action cam or maybe putting it on a gimbal or attaching it to a car or something like that, but out of the box, this thing is not great for handheld. It's very awkward to hold. We have a small rig cage on it, but we don't have a handle or anything on it. So unless you rig it up with some good accessories, this thing is very awkward to deal with in a handheld situation. Some couple side notes. Yes, like our other cameras, this camera does not do 4K. And like we said in our other videos, 4K doesn't really matter a lot of the times. If you have a great lens, if you have great lighting, 4K doesn't matter all the time, especially if you're outputting to 1080p or you're web streaming, 4K doesn't matter that much. Another thing though we should mention is that for not too much more, you can get a camera that solves a lot of these issues. The new Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K is coming out in a couple of months, and it's only about $300 to $400 more than this camera. But considering it comes with a screen and all that stuff, it's probably worth considering that other camera rather than this camera. All right, so just to summarize, the main reason we use this camera and the main reason we put up with a lot of its quirks and a lot of its issues is the image quality. We love the image quality. Personally, I love Blackmagic's image quality, and for the price, it's really great. So that's really why we use it. Anytime we have control over the environment where we can actually use this camera, we love to use it because the image quality is really, really sweet. And it's really, really fun to color grade this stuff. It is really fun to color grade Blackmagic footage. All right, that's it. If you guys have any questions about this camera, leave them in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the little bell icon if you want notifications. All right, that's it for this one, guys. We'll catch you in the next one.